For this one moment, know only that you are loved, that you are safe and whole and loved. Know that you belong here, here among us, here upon this earth, in your body, however tired or broken your heart may be. These are words from this morning's reading. And I think these words are always needed, but especially now. Now, as we are closer to the 2-year mark than the 1-year mark of a global pandemic, and all the ripples that have come from it. I think it's easy to forget that we are loved, are lovable, and that we can love others. I have seen the faces of this pandemic. Those who made different choices than I have and have paid with their lives. The angry family members unable to visit a hospital. The sick and lonely and scared. I have watched staff get stretched thin, the load they carry more stressful than ever. And I have witnessed love, compassion, and human vulnerability. I recall sitting in on a family care conference with one of our critical care doctors. The family joined over Zoom because right now we're not allowing visitors in the hospital. After the basic medical questions and updates, one family member tentatively asked if his loved one's care was being impacted by their choice not to be vaccinated. He was worried that this choice would result in subpar care. The doctor replied that we treat everyone the same, regardless of vaccine status. That his job is to help people survive illness. And that he and our staff are always rooting for those in our care to get better. He continued that many people he treats end up in the hospital because of choices they make. It is a place to heal, not to judge. And this is the delicate tightrope being walked by many of our medical staff. Being angry and frustrated and sad about a system and culture that has led people to make choices that put themselves and others at risk. And care for individual humans. Because we, the staff at the hospital, are also human. And it's not usually that clear-cut in our thinking. I sat with a young man as his mother died of COVID. Neither had been vaccinated. He told me that he had some learning disabilities, and he wasn't sure what he should believe about the vaccine because he's seen so much conflicting information. He was scared to get it because he didn't know what was true. My heart broke for him and swelled with anger at fake news and misinformation. In this moment of tragedy and desperation, I drew on what had called me to ministry in the first place: love. I sat with his grief. I made sure there were tissues close by, that he had eaten breakfast, that he wouldn't have to be alone, even if it was just in that brief time. This isn't written to pat myself on the back for doing my job, but because this is the only way that I've gotten through the past 18 months, grounding myself in the first thing I ever experienced as divine, and that is love. I have felt a call to ministry since the age of 14. Growing up UU, my involvement in Sunday school and church waxed and waned. When I was in my early teens, I was struggling to figure out where I belonged outside my family. I was the weird kid at my school, and my childhood friends were starting to drift off into other cliques and interest groups. I struggled with anxiety and not fitting in, and my mental health was suffering. I started attending our local youth group and then larger youth gatherings called conferences, where 20 to 60 youth from the surrounding geographical area would get together at a church for the weekend, Friday night to Sunday morning, and create community through worship, music, social justice work, games, cooking shared meals, and staying up into the wee hours just talking. To borrow religious language from elsewhere, this is where I was saved. This is where I knew that God, or whatever name people gave it, was love. Because it was the first time I felt supported, of the first time I found a place outside of my family that I showed up exactly as I was, with all of my quirks and weirdness, and was embraced just for being there. I know that love saved me. This is where my call to ministry started. I knew that somehow, somewhere, I wanted to give back to the world what I had received. I had an idea that my presence could be a sanctuary for others in the way my youth community had been for me. I will admit, at 14, I thought this was a radical idea. I was a bit disappointed years later when I learned of a Christian hymn, "Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary." I guess I wasn't the only one to have that idea. The story of getting to where I am now as a full-time healthcare chaplain is a long one, probably more appropriate for a book than a sermon. But even in the hardest times, there was this idea deep within me calling me to sacred work. For me, the first and seventh principles have always been bookends that hold together principles 2 through 6, providing a stable framework to hold up the ideas that guide us as you use. The first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, invites us to look beyond the physical and cultural trappings of someone and to see into their hearts. This is not to dismiss anyone's lived experience, the things that have shaped them, the identities they carry, just to see that also there is something in them, aside from that, that is worthy. The seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, points us to this idea that this worthiness, inner spark, soul, spirit of life, is also something that connects all of us together in the shared experience of being human. I often tell people that I don't do a lot in my job. I just sit there with people. But really, that can be so much, especially when it is done grounded in a place of love. Holding space for another human who is suffering, a space without judgment, without agenda, can be a beautiful gift. And it is not always easy. Earlier this year, I was called to the ER because a young man had been in an accident. I sat with his mother as the patient was taken to get a CT scan. She shared with me about her children, that they were all risk takers and liked extreme sports. She said she wasn't a stranger to the emergency room, but that it doesn't really get any easier. We had built a comfortable rapport. At one point, she told me that even though it was quite warm in the room, she was going to keep her jacket on. She moved close to me and started to unzip it, revealing a political t-shirt that did not sit well with me. She said her son had told her to keep it covered up when in public. She smiled and winked at me. And I will be honest when I tell you, my heart sank a bit. And my blood pressure surely kicked up a notch. It was definitely harder to sit with her after that. I had to keep reminding myself that she is a mother whose child is injured. She is scared. She is human. Inherent worth and dignity, inherent worth and dignity, interconnected web of existence. One of the ministers at the church I grew up in said, "You don't have to like people to love them." And I agree with her. And I also know it can make it easier. And this is where I had to ground myself in love again, because it's the only way I could be compassionately present. And here's the thing, it's not only about being a chaplain. It's about how we can navigate such a stressful time. I'm not saying that we don't stand up for things, that we roll over and are passive in the face of injustice. But what I am saying is that our responses need to come from a place of compassion, because we are all hurting, wherever we land on political and cultural issues. I was recently talking to my boss who came on board at the hospital a few months ago. We were meeting outside of the office for a check-in, get-to-know-you time. I shared with him some of the story of my call to ministry that I mentioned earlier in the sermon. I told him about the idea of being a sanctuary for others simply by being present, without judgment or expectation. I said to my boss, "That's the work, isn't it?" He agreed, but I could tell he didn't fully get what I was saying. "It's the work of chaplaincy, yes," I said, "but what I mean is, it's the work, the big work, the work of being human and being a spiritually developing human." He smiled and nodded. But how do we do it? Like I said, I know it's not easy. As we bump up against others whose ideas we cannot find common ground with, who we might even see as the enemy, it is easy to lash out, especially as that bumping up happens more and more through social media, where it is easy to unconsciously slip into dehumanizing the person on the other side of the screen. However, we know that shame and yelling and insults are not good motivators. They create toxic cultures and relationships. In my experiences, these responses often come from our wounded places. It's hard to reach out and extend love if we are getting defensive, detaching, dissociating, placating, being codependent. All of these things are ways that we keep our tender places protected. Lao Tzu said, "There must be peace in nations." If there is to be peace in nations, there must be peace in cities. If there is to be peace in cities, there must be peace between neighbors. If there is peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the home. And if there is to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart. Peace in our hearts, peace inside ourselves, is no small thing. In her book, Awakening the Tree of Life, 7 Initiations to Heal Body, Soul, and Spirit, Megan Wagner talks about our psycho-spiritual landscape as a tree with 3 key sections: roots, trunk, and branches. The branches represent our spiritual selves, the part of us that is open to mystery and unity and compassion for all existence. The trunk is our adult self, our knowledge of who we are and what we are meant to be. And the roots hold our inner child. The roots provide grounding for the rest of the tree. Without a healthy root system, the rest of the tree would be unstable. It is in our roots where we hold our childhood wounds, the stories we have absorbed about ourselves that may not serve us, and it is where we can heal. This healing can happen in many ways. In Wagner's model, she creates an image of a good mother who is ever present to our inner child, whatever it needs, paired with a mindfulness that helps us recognize what she calls the negative mother or the bad mother, and learning how to banish that when it shows up. My own healing work has come through spiritual practice and therapy, specifically internal family systems therapy, which has been life-changing for me. There are a lot of psychological and spiritual modalities that can facilitate the healing of our wounded parts or inner child. I will attest that this has been one of the most important things in my personal development. The healing work that has allowed me to firm up my roots so that the trunk and branches of my tree are well supported. Being firm in my trunk and knowing my truth, following my calling, has also helped my spiritual branches expand wide, bearing fruits of compassion. When I no longer get in my own way because I'm scared or defensive, I am able to be more fully present to those I encounter. I've shared a lot about myself today, which I don't usually do. And I hope some of it resonates for you, or sparks something for you. But really what I hope most is that you hear the words in the reading, that you take in the words of our closing song when we get there, that for a moment here you feel loved, even if you can't return it, even if you don't know how to love yourself. I want you to know you are loved, because we need that, and we need to give it to each other. Things are hard, and there will always be hard things, but there will also always be love. As we move into our video meditation, I invite you to allow your heart to soften and maybe even break open wide.